The financial sustainability of LIV Golf has become one of the most significant questions in professional sports business. Hey everyone, before we dive into this incredible story, go ahead and subscribe so you never miss videos like this. What began as a project backed by seemingly unlimited resources from Saudi Arabia's public investment fund has evolved into a situation characterized by mounting financial pressures, uncertain revenue streams, and questions about long-term viability. Understanding whether LIV Golf faces genuine financial crisis or merely strategic adjustment requires examining the league's spending patterns, revenue generation challenges, the stalled merger with the PGA Tour, and the broader competitive dynamics reshaping professional golf. When LIV Golf launched in 2022, the financial scale was unprecedented in golf history. The league offered signing bonuses reportedly ranging from tens of millions to over $200 million for top players. Phil Mickelson's reported $200 million, Dustin Johnson's estimated $125 million, and Brooks Koepka's rumored $100 million represented just the most publicized deals. Additional players received 8-figure and 7-figure bonuses to join. These upfront payments alone likely totaled over $1 billion before considering ongoing salaries, prize money, operational costs, or infrastructure investment. The business model behind this spending assumed that massive initial investment would secure top talent, which would attract audiences, which would generate media rights revenue and sponsorship income sufficient to eventually achieve profitability, or at least sustainable operations. This approach mirrors strategies used in other industries where companies deliberately operate at losses during growth phases, planning to achieve profitability once market position is established. However, this strategy requires eventually achieving the revenue growth that justifies the initial investment. For LIV Golf, that revenue growth has proven far more difficult than anticipated. The viewership numbers represent perhaps the most significant challenge to LIV's business model. Professional sports leagues generate revenue primarily through media rights deals, which are valued based on audience size and engagement. LIV's television viewership in the United States has consistently underperformed expectations. Events broadcast on the CW network reportedly drew audiences often below 300,000 viewers and sometimes significantly less. For context, regular PGA Tour events typically draw audiences of 1 to 2 million viewers, while major championships can exceed 5 to 10 million viewers for final rounds. These low viewership numbers created cascading problems. The CW network partnership, announced with considerable fanfare as LIV's breakthrough into mainstream American television, deteriorated rapidly. Reports indicated some CW affiliates declined to carry LIV events, preferring alternative programming. The partnership quietly ended without renewal, leaving LIV without consistent American television presence. The league shifted towards streaming distribution, but streaming audiences for golf have historically been smaller than traditional television audiences, and LIV's streaming numbers haven't been publicly disclosed in ways that suggest strong performance. Without substantial viewership, the fundamental economics of sports broadcasting break down. Media companies pay for sports rights based on advertising revenue potential, which depends directly on audience size. If events consistently draw small audiences, media companies cannot charge premium advertising rates, which means they cannot justify paying substantial rights fees. This creates a vicious cycle. Without media revenue, the league cannot reduce its financial losses. But without improving the product in ways that attract viewers, media revenue remains unattainable. The sponsorship situation compounds these challenges. Corporate sponsorship represents another major revenue stream for sports leagues. Companies sponsor events, teams, or individual elements of broadcast to gain exposure to audiences. However, sponsorship decisions depend on multiple factors beyond just audience size. LIV Golf faces several distinct challenges in attracting sponsors. First, the direct association with Saudi Arabia's public investment fund creates political and reputational concerns for potential sponsors. Some companies wish to avoid association with the Saudi government due to human rights concerns, geopolitical considerations, or potential consumer backlash. This eliminates certain potential sponsors regardless of LIV's sporting merits. Second, the ongoing uncertainty about LIV's relationship with the PGA Tour and the broader professional golf ecosystem makes sponsorship commitments risky. Companies making multi-year sponsorship deals want stability and predictability. The unresolved merger discussions, the possibility of format changes, and uncertainty about which players will participate long-term all create risk that sponsors prefer to avoid. Third, the actual audience metrics don't support premium sponsorship pricing. Sponsors pay based on exposure value, and with viewership numbers consistently below expectations, LIV cannot command the sponsorship rates that would be necessary to significantly offset operational costs. Reports from industry insiders suggest that LIV has struggled to secure major sponsors beyond companies with existing relationships to Saudi interests. While some sponsorship deals exist, the overall sponsorship revenue appears far below what would be necessary for a league with LIV's cost structure to approach financial sustainability. The player satisfaction dimension adds another layer of complexity. LIV attracted players through combination of enormous signing bonuses, guaranteed salaries, reduced schedule demands, and promises of revolutionizing professional golf. However, the actual experience of competing in LIV has created various points of dissatisfaction for players. The most significant issue involves world ranking points and major championship access. The official world golf ranking system has not awarded points for LIV events, meaning LIV players cannot improve or maintain their rankings through LIV performance. World rankings matter primarily because they determine eligibility for major championships and other important events. Players who joined LIV have seen their rankings decline, which has cost some players their qualification for majors they previously would have entered. For players whose primary motivation was financial, this may be an acceptable trade-off. They received massive compensation and accepted reduced access to certain tournaments. However, for players who care about legacy and competing in historically significant events, the inability to earn ranking points represents a genuine sacrifice that some appear to regret. Additionally, the team format that LIV emphasizes has not resonated with players or audiences as strongly as the league hoped. Golf has historically been an individual sport, and while team elements exist in events like the Ryder Cup, they're occasional rather than central to the sport's identity. LIV's team structure, with franchises, captains, and team standings, has struggled to generate the engagement and loyalty that characterize successful team sports. Players and audiences alike have difficulty caring about team results when individual performance remains the primary focus. Reports suggest that some LIV players have quietly expressed frustration about various aspects of the league's operations, though public criticism remains rare, given that players signed contracts worth tens of millions, and presumably include provisions discouraging public disparagement. However, the rumors of players seeking potential exit strategies or hoping for the PGA merger to provide path back to traditional tour competition indicate that at least some players view their LIV experience less positively than initially expected. The proposed merger between LIV Golf and the PGA Tour, announced in June 2023, was supposed to resolve many of these tensions by creating unified structure that would end the split in professional golf. However, the merger process has been extraordinarily problematic and remains unresolved. The announcement itself created immediate controversy because it was negotiated in secret between a small number of executives without informing the PGA Tour's membership, LIV's players, or other stakeholders. Both PGA Tour players who had remained loyal and LIV players who had defected felt blindsided. The surprise announcement immediately created trust issues that have complicated subsequent negotiations. The substantive negotiations have proven even more difficult. The PGA Tour and LIV represent fundamentally different visions for professional golf. The PGA Tour is a membership organization with democratic governance, established traditions, and deep institutional history. LIV is a top-down organization funded by a sovereign wealth fund, operating without democratic structures. Merging these organizations requires resolving profound differences about governance, control, player access, tournament structure, and distribution of revenues and power. Additionally, the merger faces regulatory scrutiny. The United States Department of Justice has opened investigation into potential antitrust concerns, examining whether the merger would create anti-competitive conditions in professional golf. This investigation has no clear timeline, and its outcome could significantly affect whether and how any merger proceeds. The negotiations have repeatedly missed announced deadlines. Initial expectations that a framework agreement would be reached within months have proven unrealistic. Each missed deadline increases uncertainty and allows speculation to flourish about whether the merger will happen at all, and if so, in what form. From LIV's perspective, the stalled merger creates strategic problems. The merger was potentially a path toward integration with the established golf ecosystem, which could have provided access to world ranking points, major championship qualification pathways, and broader legitimacy that might improve viewership and sponsorship. Without the merger, LIV remains isolated from the traditional professional golf structure, which perpetuates the challenges the merger was supposed to solve. The financial implications are substantial. Operating a professional golf league requires ongoing expenditures measured in hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Player salaries and bonuses represent only one component. Event operations, travel and logistics, broadcast production, marketing, administrative overhead, legal and regulatory costs, and facility expenses all accumulate. Industry analysts have estimated LIV's annual losses at $200 to $400 million, though precise figures remain undisclosed and disputed. These losses are sustainable as long as the public investment fund continues providing capital. However, even sovereign wealth funds eventually expect returns on investments, or at minimum, clear paths toward eventual profitability. The question is whether PIF views LIV as a long-term strategic investment that serves broader Saudi economic and political objectives regardless of profitability, or whether LIV is expected to eventually achieve financial sustainability on sporting and commercial grounds. Reports from various sources suggest increasing pressure from PIF for LIV to demonstrate progress toward financial viability. This pressure allegedly manifests in several ways: greater scrutiny of expenditures, pressure to reduce costs, expectations for improved revenue performance, and demands for clear strategic direction. If accurate, this indicates that even PIF's substantial resources are not unlimited or unconditionally available. The evidence for financial stress remains largely circumstantial and based on observed patterns rather than confirmed financial disclosures. LIV is privately funded and not required to publish detailed financial statements. However, several observable indicators suggest financial pressure. First, the spending patterns appear to have moderated. The massive signing bonuses that characterized 2022 and early 2023 have become less common. While LIV still attracts some players, the reported compensation packages are generally smaller than the initial wave of signings. This could indicate strategic adjustment rather than financial constraint, but it's consistent with an organization facing pressure to control costs. Second, the organizational structure has experienced changes. Executive turnover, shifts in strategic messaging, and modifications to event formats and schedules suggest an organization searching for a sustainable operating model rather than confidently executing an established plan. Stable, well-funded organizations typically demonstrate more consistency in leadership and strategy. Third, the lack of major new sponsorships or media deals suggests that commercial reception remains weak. If LIV were succeeding in building audience and commercial appeal, we would expect to see announcements of new partnerships, expanding media distribution, and growing sponsorship rosters. The absence of such positive developments, while not definitive evidence of crisis, certainly doesn't suggest financial health. Fourth, the stalled merger discussions could be interpreted as reflecting LIV's weakened negotiating position. If LIV were thriving independently, it might have less incentive to merge with the PGA Tour. The apparent continued interest in merger, despite the problematic negotiations, might indicate that LIV recognizes it faces long-term sustainability challenges without integration into the broader golf ecosystem. However, alternative interpretations exist for each of these observations. Reduced spending on player acquisitions might reflect having already signed sufficient talent rather than budget constraints. Organizational changes might represent normal evolution rather than crisis response. Lack of new commercial partnerships might reflect strategic patience rather than market rejection. Continued merger interest might reflect PIF's broader strategic objectives rather than LIV's financial weakness. The truth likely involves elements of both interpretations. LIV probably faces genuine financial sustainability challenges given the gap between revenues and costs, but probably isn't on the verge of imminent collapse given PIF's resources and strategic commitment to the project. The relevant question isn't whether LIV will suddenly shut down next month, but rather whether the current trajectory leads toward eventual sustainability, or whether fundamental changes are necessary. Several scenarios could unfold over the coming years. First, the PGA merger could eventually complete in some form, integrating LIV's resources and players into a unified structure that resolves many current tensions. This would likely involve compromises from both sides, but could create a more stable long-term arrangement. Second, LIV could continue operating independently while gradually improving its commercial performance through better content, marketing, and audience development, eventually achieving, if not profitability, then at least manageable loss levels that PIF accepts. Third, LIV could undertake major restructuring, potentially reducing the number of events or teams, consolidating operations, and seeking more sustainable cost structure even if it means scaling back ambitions. Fourth, in the most pessimistic scenario, LIV could eventually cease operations if PIF determines the investment isn't achieving sufficient return on Saudi Arabia's strategic objectives, though this seems unlikely given the reputational costs of such a visible failure. The broader implications extend beyond LIV's specific fate. The LIV experiment has already permanently changed professional golf by demonstrating that the PGA Tour's dominance could be challenged, forcing the PGA Tour to significantly increase prize money and improve player compensation, and raising fundamental questions about governance in professional golf. Even if LIV ultimately fails as an independent entity, its impact on professional golf will persist through these changes it forced upon the established system. For players who joined LIV, their situations vary significantly depending on contract terms, remaining career length, personal finances, and individual priorities. Some players received sufficient compensation that financial security is assured regardless of LIV's fate. Others might face more complicated situations if LIV restructures or if pathways back to traditional tour competition remain blocked. The resolution of the merger discussions could significantly affect player outcomes. The question of whether LIV is running out of money is probably too simplistic. LIV has access to enormous capital through PIF, so absolute shortage of funds isn't the issue. The more precise question is whether LIV faces increasing pressure to demonstrate that continued investment is justified by progress towards strategic objectives, whether those objectives are defined in sporting, commercial, or geopolitical terms. The available evidence suggests such pressure exists and is growing, but whether it reaches levels that force dramatic changes depends on decisions being made within PIF and Saudi government that outside observers cannot directly observe. What we can observe is that LIV's current business model, high costs, low revenues, uncertain strategic direction, is not sustainable indefinitely without continued substantial subsidy. Whether that subsidy continues unconditionally, continues with increasing demands for performance improvement, or eventually gets reduced depends on factors extending well beyond sporting considerations into Saudi Arabia's broader strategic calculations about how golf investment serves the nation's economic diversification and international influence objectives. The LIV Golf story represents a fascinating case study in sports business, illustrating the limits of even massive financial resources when facing challenges of audience development, commercial viability, and competitive dynamics with established institutions. Whether LIV ultimately succeeds in transforming professional golf or becomes a cautionary tale about unsustainable business models will be determined over the coming years as these various pressures and uncertainties resolve into clearer outcomes.